I grew up in a small town where dreams were smaller than the houses we lived in. My family was not poor, but we were far from comfortable. Being the youngest in the family meant that nothing I owned was truly mine. I wore my brother's old shirts, his worn jeans, even his faded sneakers with the soles coming loose. At school, kids noticed, and they made sure I noticed too. I learned early to keep my head down and my feelings tucked away. Dad always said we had to be practical, that there was no point in buying new things when the old ones still worked. So I learned to sew torn pockets and patch up holes and call it good enough. But deep inside, I promised myself that one day I would have something that was mine from the start. When I turned 18, I left home with nothing but a suitcase half filled with those same hand-me-downs. College was out of reach, so I took whatever work I could find. I worked mornings at a coffee shop, afternoons cleaning offices, and nights stocking shelves at a grocery store. It was exhausting, but every paycheck reminded me that I was moving one step closer to my own life. After years of saving and hustling, I finally got my chance. A friend told me about a small property near the coast, a fixer-upper that most people would have laughed at. But when I saw it, I felt something stir inside me. The salty air, the sound of waves crashing, the idea that I could wake up every morning to that view. It needed work, but so did I, and maybe fixing it up would fix something in me too. I bought it, poured everything I had into it, and turned it into a warm, welcoming beach house. For the first time in my life, I felt proud of something I built with my own hands. One summer afternoon, Dad came to visit for the first time since I bought it. He walked through the rooms, quietly ran his hand over the furniture, looked out at the ocean. Then he turned to me and said something that knocked the air out of my lungs. He said, "This house should belong to your brother and his family. They need it more than you do." I stared at Dad, not sure if I had heard him right. The sound of the waves outside felt suddenly distant, like they were coming from another world. My brother and I had not been close for years. He had stayed in town working at the family business, while I had left to find my own way. Dad always favored him, always said he was the responsible one, the one who would carry on the family name. I asked Dad why he thought the house should be his. He shrugged and said, "Your brother has a wife and kids. They could use a place like this for family vacations. You are single. You do not need all this space." His words stung deeper than I wanted to admit. It was not just about the house, it was about everything I had worked for, the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the years of wearing other people's cast-offs, so I could save for my own future. I told him, "This house is mine. I bought it with my own money. I fixed every wall, every floorboard. I painted every room with my own hands." But he looked at me like I was being selfish. "You have always had more freedom than your brother," he said. "You owe it to the family to share what you have." I felt anger rising in me, but also sadness. Sadness that even now Dad could not see me for who I was or what I had built. He walked to the porch and looked out at the water as if the conversation was already over. The gulls cried overhead, the wind rattled the windows, but inside I felt a heavy stillness. I wondered if he had told my brother about this, yet if plans were already being made without me knowing. I thought about all the times I had been told to be practical, to settle for less, to make do with what I was given. Now that I had finally created something of my own, it felt like it was slipping away before my eyes. My brother called later that evening, his voice unusually warm, almost too warm. He said he heard Dad had visited and that the house looked amazing. I asked him if Dad had spoken to him about anything. There was a pause long enough for me to hear the waves in the background of my own silence. Then he said, "Maybe we should talk in person." The way he said it made my chest tighten. I told him I was busy, but he insisted, saying he could drive down this weekend with his family. He made it sound casual, but I could hear something else in his voice, a certain eagerness. That night, I could not sleep. I walked through the house, touching the walls, the furniture, the windows I had cleaned until they shone. Every corner of this place held a memory of my work, the long nights, the early mornings, the small victories when something finally came together. I thought about the first night I slept here on an air mattress, listening to the ocean and feeling like I had finally arrived somewhere that was mine. The idea of someone taking it away, even if that someone was my brother, made my stomach twist. When Saturday came, I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. My brother stepped out of the car, smiling wide, his wife, holding their youngest child, while the older two ran toward the water. They walked through the house like they already belonged here, opening doors, peeking into rooms, running their hands over countertops. My brother said this is perfect for the kids, they will love coming here every summer. I asked him what made him think they would be coming here every summer. He looked at me surprised, as if I had missed the obvious. Dad said, "You were thinking about letting us use it." He told me it would be good for the family. I felt the heat rise in my face, but I kept my voice steady. I said this house is not just a place, it is my home. He laughed lightly like I was joking and said, "Come on, you are hardly here most of the year anyway." His words sank deep because they carried the same tone Dad used when dismissing my choices. I glanced out at the ocean where the kids were splashing in the shallows, their laughter mixing with the crash of the waves. Somewhere inside me, a quiet determination began to take shape, one that told me I was not going to let this go without a fight. I took a deep breath and told my brother we needed to talk alone. We stepped out onto the porch, the salty breeze moving between us like an invisible wall. I asked him if he understood what this house meant to me. He shrugged and said, "I know you worked hard, but we are family and family shares." I reminded him of all the years I had gone without so I could save enough to buy this place. I told him how every board, every nail, every stroke of paint had been my own doing. He listened, but I could tell his mind was already made up. "Dad thinks it makes sense," he said. "You have no one else to enjoy it with." The words hit me harder than I expected. No one else to enjoy it with, as if my life was somehow incomplete without a family of my own, as if my worth was tied to whether I could fill the rooms with people. I turned to face the ocean, letting the sound of the waves steady me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "Look, we could work something out. Maybe you keep it, but let us use it most of the time." His offer sounded generous on the surface, but I could hear what it really meant. It meant the house would slowly stop feeling like mine, until one day, it simply was not anymore. I told him I would think about it, but inside I knew there was nothing to think about. This was my place, my safe harbor after years of drifting. Still, I could feel the pressure building. Dad, on one side, my brother, on the other, both convinced they were right. That night, as the house settled around me and the ocean whispered against the shore, I realized this was not just about the beach house. It was about finally claiming something that no one could hand down to me or take away. The next morning, I woke early before the sun had fully risen. The air was cool and the horizon was painted in soft shades of pink and gold. I made coffee and stood by the window watching the waves roll in slow and steady like they had all the time in the world. I thought about everything my brother had said and everything Dad had hinted at. They both spoke as if this house was already halfway theirs, as if my years of sacrifice were just a small detail in a larger family plan I had never agreed to. When the kids woke up, their laughter filled the rooms, and for a moment, I understood why they wanted this place so badly. It was peaceful here, it was safe, it was the kind of place that could hold memories for a lifetime. But it was also the place I had built when I had nothing and no one else. Later that day, Dad arrived without warning. He walked in like he owned the place, greeting everyone with a smile before turning to me. "We should have a family meeting," he said, his tone light but his eyes serious. We all sat in the living room, the ocean breeze drifting through the open windows. Dad began talking about the importance of family, about how we should all think of the greater good instead of just ourselves. I listened quietly, my hands folded in my lap. Then he said it again, that the house would be better used if my brother and his family had it for most of the year. He spoke as if my agreement was a formality, as if I had no real choice in the matter. I looked around the room at the faces watching me. My brother with that faint smile, his wife avoiding my eyes, the children restless and unaware of the weight in the air. For a moment, I felt like the child I used to be, sitting at the dinner table, wearing my brother's old clothes, being told to accept what was given without question. But I was not that child anymore. I leaned back in my chair and let the silence stretch longer than anyone seemed comfortable with. Dad shifted in his seat, clearing his throat, as if the pause meant I had no argument left. But inside, my thoughts were sharp and steady. I told them this house is not just a building by the ocean, it is my work, my years, my sacrifices. It is the proof that I can create something for myself without it being handed down or decided for me. My brother tried to interrupt, saying, "We all know you worked hard, but—" I raised my hand to stop him. "No," I said, "you do not know, not really. You were here living your life while I was cleaning floors and making coffee at dawn. You did not see the nights I slept in my car to save rent, or the winters I skipped heating just to put money away." Dad frowned like I was making it too dramatic, but I kept going. I told them I was not here to be selfish. I was here to protect what I had built. The room went quiet except for the sound of the waves through the open window. My brother looked at me differently, then not angry, but calculating, like he was trying to figure out if there was another way to get what he wanted. Dad finally said, "I just thought you would want to help your family." I said, "I will help in many ways, but not by giving up the one thing that has been mine from the start." No one spoke after that for a while. The only movement was my niece pressing her face against the window to watch the gulls outside. The tension was thick, but I could feel a strange calm settling over me. For once I was not just reacting, I was standing. Dad's eyes narrowed slightly, like he was weighing whether to push the matter further. My brother leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his voice softer now. He said, "Maybe we can work something out that feels fair to everyone." But the way he said fair made me think his version of it would still leave me with less than what I had earned. I told him I was open to listening, but not to surrendering. The truth is, I could see the house in his eyes already, like he was picturing his kids running through the halls summer after summer, while I became just a guest in my own home. I stood and walked to the window, letting the ocean air fill the space between my thoughts. I remembered the first day I got the keys, the sound of the lock turning, the way my hands shook when I stepped inside. There had been no furniture, no curtains, no warmth, just bare walls and the echo of possibility. Everything since then I had put here with intention. I turned back to them and said, "This is not about generosity, this is about respect." Dad looked away as if my words had hit something he did not want to face. My brother shifted uncomfortably, his smile gone, now replaced with something harder to read. I knew this conversation was not over, and that when they left the house would still carry the shadow of their claim. But I also knew that I was not the same person who had quietly taken whatever was given to her. I was someone who could say no and mean it. The afternoon sun had started to dip, casting long shadows across the living room floor. Dad stood and stretched as if the meeting was finished, but his silence told me he was only retreating for now, not giving up. My brother's kids were still playing on the porch, their voices bright and careless against the heavy air inside. I walked into the kitchen to get some water, and my brother followed, leaning against the doorway watching me. He said, "You know, Dad will keep bringing this up until he gets what he wants." I told him then he better be ready to hear the same answer every time. He smirked slightly, but there was no humor in it, just a quiet challenge. "You always were stubborn," he said. I replied, "Maybe that's the only reason I made it this far." For a moment we just stood there, the sound of the waves filling the space where words might have gone. Then he asked, "You ever think about how much easier life would be if you just went along with things?" I met his eyes and said, "Easier? For who?" He didn't answer. He just turned and walked back toward the porch, calling for his kids. I stayed in the kitchen, staring at the counter I had refinished with my own hands, feeling the smooth surface under my fingertips. It was strange how people could look at something you had built from the ground up and still see it as theirs to take. Through the open window, I heard Dad laughing with my brother outside, the kind of laughter that comes when a plan is still in motion. I realized then that this fight might not end with one conversation or even 10. It was going to be a long battle, one I would have to be ready for every time they came near this place. As the sun dipped lower, the sky turned a deep orange, spilling warm light across the sand outside. I stepped onto the porch, leaning against the railing, watching the tide pull back slowly. Dad and my brother were talking in low voices, their heads tilted close together. They stopped when they saw me, their expressions shifting into something more neutral, but the silence between them said enough. My brother's kids ran past me, chasing each other toward the water, leaving little footprints in the sand. I could not help but think how easy it would be for them to grow up believing this was their place, how natural it would feel for them to come here year after year, until my name on the deed was just a detail no one mentioned. Dad came over, resting his hand on the railing beside mine. He said, "You know, I am only trying to do what is best for everyone." I told him what is best for everyone is not always fair to the person who worked for it. He sighed, looking out at the horizon where the sun was slipping lower. Sometimes you have to put the family first, he said. I reminded him I have been putting the family first my whole life, wearing what was left over, giving up what I wanted, because someone else needed it more. And now I am asking for one thing that stays mine. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. My brother called for his kids to pack up their things, and I felt a small relief, knowing they would be leaving soon. But I also knew this was not the last time they would stand on this porch trying to picture themselves here permanently. The waves rolled in again, slow, steady, unbothered by the arguments of people on shore. And I wondered how long I could keep holding my ground before the tide tried to wash it away. That night the house was quiet again. The sound of the ocean was steady like a heartbeat in the dark. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, staring at the deed to the house lying in front of me. The paper felt heavier than it should have, because it carried every hour I had worked, every sacrifice I had made, every moment I had doubted myself, but kept going anyway. In the morning, my brother's family left their car, tires crunching over the gravel until the sound faded into the distance. Dad lingered at the doorway, looking at me for a long time before saying, "We'll talk again." I told him, maybe, but my mind was already set. When the door closed, I walked through the rooms one more time, the sunlight spilling across the floors, touching the walls I had painted with my own hands. For the first time in days, I felt the house breathing with me again, like it knew it was still mine. I stepped out onto the porch, the salty wind brushing my face, and I let the waves remind me of something important. Tides will always come and go, but some things you hold on to no matter how hard the water tries to pull them away. And this house was one of them.